it's Brian McCarthy here from Bold&Break, and I'm excited to do a Redshift video finally. I want to build upon the Redshift video we did last year on breaking down Redshift and how to speed up your render times. Just a note here with Redshift, I think sometimes if there's a new and exciting render engine out there, there's a premise that it's the best at everything or the best at photoreal, and not necessarily the case with Redshift. Redshift is the best at having the ultimate amount of control. I think if you're looking for something for photoreal, there are better render engines out there. I don't think Redshift is a quick fix like any render engine. I think you need to get in there, learn the tools, understand design, understand composition. These are actually the things that will make your renders look better, not the render engine itself. Enough of that. I want to go into more advanced areas of Redshift, and I am now using Redshift 3.0.44 since the update of Redshift version 3. There have been quite a few updates, and one of the first ones we can see here is we are met with a very simple panel. I would say if you're going to use Redshift, forget using this panel. Always be within the advanced panel of Redshift. There's no real point in using Redshift unless you're going to take advantage of the control it offers you. Let's get started here and let's kind of dive straight into some fun and juicy global illumination. So we're going to turn on our sky. Let's turn on our portal light, and you can already see the difference with this portal light. It's bringing in quite a bit of light. Just click out of our scene there, come out of the camera. You can see there's a hole in the room and my portal light is set up nicely there. Let's go back into our camera view. Currently I do not have global illumination on, but let's switch it on and see the difference. Let's take off our bucket render, and we can already see the difference with our global illumination. Let's bring down our rays to 32, which is the default. So it's quite noisy at the moment. Yeah, very noisy. Let's take a snapshot of this, and this will be our reference point. So that took 11 seconds, that one, with global illumination. Here our sky is our main source of light. The global illumination allows for the light bounce to take place within this scene. Let's just up our rays here by 128 and see what that's going to do for us. We're going to get much less noise. Let's just crop this for now. Okay, so we can already see the noise difference in this crop. If we were to add maybe 6 bounces to this scene, we can see our scene is brightening. That's because there is more light bounce going on. So what happens is, if our camera was to fire a ray, that ray will bounce around the room, and that ray will look for a source of light and bounce back through, illuminating each object. And so the bounces that we choose, the amount of rays that we put into our scene, so if we bring that down to 1, it's going to be significantly darker, and that is because we are not putting as many rays into the scene. So let's bring that back up to 6. Again, it's going to be more intensive the more information you throw at the scene. Now, if we were to do an Irradiance point cloud, it's going to be much faster. I would advise for the Irradiance point cloud to not necessarily just rely on it just because it's faster. Sometimes when doing animations with Irradiance point cloud, it can be quite blotchy, and it's not always the best if there's a lot of animation. For stills, it can work quite well if you're struggling to get something out in time. So let's put our screen radius up to 64 and keep our samples at 32, and let's put our rays up to 256. And the nice thing about using the Irradiance point cloud as a secondary engine is we can really bump up the rays of our primary GI, which is where the heavy lifting is going to be, and it allows for so much less noise. Look at the noise difference here between our first initial render and now our third or fourth render after inputting this information. Now, one of the things that might be suffering here is if we go into our sampling, let's have a quick look at this, and we look at our reflections and we put this up to 128, we should get less noise overall. So what I'm going to do to test this, I'm going to take away our crop. Okay, so that's 27 seconds. Not an enormous amount of noise, enough to want to get rid of. So let's look at adding more samples to our reflection, and let's use our crop this time. So what I'm hoping for here is we get less noise in our reflective areas of the skull. So let's take a snapshot of that. Not a lot. There's definitely a difference. You can see in the snapshot 1 where we haven't added more samples, there is some noise along that highlight rim of the skull, and there is less. So okay, so we're going to leave our reflection at 512 just because we're fixing a lot of those samples along the highlights of our skulls. Now we're still getting an awful lot of noise in the background. Let's have a look. Let's just take a snapshot of this once it finishes rendering. Well, that's still quite fast, 32 seconds. We can deal with that. Okay, cool. So we have this snapshot 5 as our reference. We're going to, because I'm happy with where we are, we're going to remove this and this, and you can already see the difference. So if we go right back down to here, and you can see this difference in the reflections, even probably here especially. Yes, definitely. So you can see how important it is to understand how the sampling menus work. If you're targeting something specific, you need to understand what you're targeting. We're still getting quite a bit of noise in these spots here, but let's have a look and see if our lights will fix this. And for this example, we're going to crop into this skull because there is quite a bit going on with ambient occlusion and lights. And we can have a look. There is quite a difference there. Now that we've put our light samples up to 512, that is basically saying to Redshift, we're adding more samples to the light coming into this room, but we're not getting much difference in the room itself and the materials behind us, which is fine. That is more of a global illumination issue. And we're going to take away our crop and let that render again. It's slowing down quite a bit. It's still at a good time considering the quality we're getting thus far. And what I would say is it's important to, put in maybe a little bit too much to get rid of those samples, and you can dial things down slowly and, work out the best balancing act to get the fastest render. Let's have a quick look at our ambient occlusion. Let's bring that up to 512. So we're really starting to focus in on the areas where there's quite a bit of noise, understand where we need to put our samples, which is the most important thing in Redshift for the quality checking. And let's see how fast. This is actually rendering quite fast. We might get a faster render time as we optimize the scene better and Redshift understands where to put the samples. And that's still at 33 seconds. Okay, now there's not any refraction really in the scene. Now, if you really are struggling with your render times and you have an NVIDIA graphics card, I would strongly recommend that you use the denoising option in Redshift. It will be a lifesaver. As you can see here, yes, your renders are a little bit more blotchy. With a little bit more tweaking, you can get beyond that. So if we were to bring this overhead down to 50, still a bit blotchy, but you could sharpen things up in post. I understand that everyone mightn't have the best equipment to fire high numbers at Redshift. It's not possible for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. So definitely take advantage of the denoising option. The Optic X is fast. It's not as accurate as the Atlas Dual, but the Atlas Dual is quite a bit slower. So we're going to go back into our global illumination, and we still have quite a bit of grain in our scene here. If we bring this up to 512, we should be able to fix this. Let's take a screenshot of that, and you can see there is a difference. So quite a lot of rays to be throwing at the scene. And if you bring down the amount of bounces in GI, you can also speed up your render, but it will look a bit darker and you won't get as much diffusion of light across different objects. And again, still some noise here. If we were to do a secondary brute force engine, this is going to be quite slow, especially with that many rays. You actually get more noise. So we're going to go back to our Irradiance cache because this is working okay for us here. Let's maybe bring this up to 8. This should be much brighter. We might get more noise. We need to figure out here what the issue is with our noise. Okay, so we are still getting quite a bit of noise with our global illumination, as you can see here. Now, we have a couple of options. One being is to turn down the bounces, but we have quite a bit of light here, and we don't really want to take that away. We can also double our brute force by, multiplying that by 2, multiply symbol by 2, and we'll get less noise. Again, let's just take a snap of this here, and you can see this is snapshot 6, and yeah, we'll get a lot of denoising from that. I'm just gonna leave the samples to where they are. We can see what this render is taking in terms of time. Just so to note here, I have freeze tessellation and freeze geometry updates on. If I change anything in the geometry, you won't see in the render view. The tessellation, anything in the make up the polygon count or displacement changes in these skulls, you won't see that either. Now, I'm actually quite pleased with how fast this is rendering considering the amount of samples. Bring this back down to 8. I did turn it up to 16. We have this render finished, and this is where we're up to 58 seconds, still under a minute. Bring our min down to 4 and our max down to 16. And do one more render and see how long that takes. Okay, in this case, we maybe shaved off, let's see, that took 57 seconds. We shaved off a second by just optimizing that. So we're going to take a snap at that. And this is our latest render. Now let's see if we can turn down any of the subsamples down slightly just to bring down the render time. Let's bring this down to 256. It's a reflection, and that will be probably the most taxing one of these subsamples. Since we put our GI up, I think it's definitely worth seeing if we can maybe bring down some of those subsamples to really save on render time. And I bet we can without losing too much. Now, there's a tiny bit of the noise again appearing, but it's not enough to care about, and I'm sure we will get a better render time because of this. Okay, 57 seconds, still not groundbreaking in terms of time saved, but we are slowly getting the render time down. Let's definitely bring down our ambient occlusion to 256 and bring down our light to 256, and we can then see if we are getting a lot more noise. If we're not getting much more noise, we will bring it down to 128. We have shaved off about 3 to 4 seconds since upping our raise for the global illumination. That is, if you're doing a 60-second render, 3 seconds is a lot. I've been there. What can we do now? Let's inspect our latest render. Still a bit of noise going in the back. Let's have a look here. Not a lot of difference since bringing down the samples. Yeah, we're still getting a little bit of noise that's creeping back into our render. Let's really try and push down this render time and see how we can optimize here. Let's bring our samples max up to 32, giving Redshift just a little bit more range to work with and to see where it can optimize a little bit better. This might increase the render time or it might decrease the render time. Let's see how this works. Okay, that was 52 seconds by just bringing our sample max to 32. That is again huge savings on time there. We're going to bring that up to 64. Okay, so by pushing it up to 64, we've kind of gone way above our threshold, leaving Redshift with a lot more work to do, and that went over a minute and we don't want that. So we're definitely going to keep at 32, keep that render time right down. So I think here is a good segue into part 2 of our video, which will be sometime soon next week. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you definitely got something from it. You can see how we readjust the samples and the global illumination, and how maybe Irradiance point cloud can definitely give you a faster result, but keeping that brute force as your primary engine for your first pass on GI. In the next part 2 of this series, we are going to look at trace depth. We're also going to look at using a HDR dome light with the similar setup that we did, and maybe go into a few other settings. Also worth noting before we end this video, in Redshift 3.0 now, hardware ray tracing if available. Tick that if you have an RTX card. Definitely worth experimenting with that feature. Please join me in part 2 when we're going to go more in depth. We're going to use the dome light and a HDR, and we're going to see the difference in render times and the cost of render time and processing power. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.